right, it is 10:09 on Friday, July 29. And this is an initial meeting of the BPW Financial Committee. And I am here to welcome everybody. My name is Richard Nichols. Tom Owen is a member of this committee. Austin Kalman, General Manager. Kimberly Belair. Carolyn Jones, Councilperson from City Council. And we have Jack Lesher on Zoom, who was a former treasurer of BPW, and also Michael Hogan, who is on Zoom, who has spent at least 30 years in asset management nationwide and globally. And there are 2 vacancies which can be filled, which we will talk about in a few minutes. So the purpose of the meeting as a public meeting for the first time of this finance committee, we are going to review documentation that we will be using as background for our discussions and various actions. Also, we are really happy to have Sharon Sexton, who is the executive assistant, who has arranged the recording and is taking minutes. What we want to do is do an overview of the documents, no voting, and trying to hold this to 60 to 90 minutes to share with the public and with the committee members documentation and issues that we will be addressing. So the first item is the Financial Committee Member Operating Guidelines and Scope, which are documents 3A and 3B. And if 3A is on the screen, just for reference.
Go up to file room.
It's the key. There's a glare, I see it.
So here is the organization chart, if you will. 4 members of BPW, 1 council member, and 3 for citizen volunteers. We are covered by FOIA, and for the present number of attendees, we do have a quorum. It is 4 of 7. If we go to the B section, 3B, this is the notice of intent and why the committee was put together. The board has spent, the BPW board spent the beginning of this year to the present gathering together all of the prior policies that the board uses for managing the utilities. And the review called out policies that were no longer in process or needed or was duplicating others, and added comments and updates to the others. And most importantly, reorganize them into a much more understandable and accessible table of contents, which if you can go to the next page on there.
But the policy, is
Yeah,
that what you want?
policy, just the policy list.
This thing here.
It's just this.
It's the list
It's
of
still-
policies
Just
Asterisk.
with the asterisks.
There you go.
Okay. This is the entire, there's 4 pages, 3 of which were highlighted with red asterisks, which are the ones that the committee was charged with looking into and seeing if improvements could be made or changes that might be helpful. Just to segue quickly, we would like to ask the committee members to think about volunteers for the 2 open committee positions that would be considered between now and the next meeting. And so that's not a decision we need to make right at the moment, but it's the request to look to see if there are other people that might be helpful that have some kind of financial business background that would be helpful in reviewing these financial committee documents, the policy documents. Next, item 5, discussion of key financial planning documents for reference. There are 7 documents that we chose as being primary, starting with 5A, which is the 5-year capital improvement budget for 2022 to 2027. And if I may, I'd like to ask Austin to comment on how this list gets compiled.
So what we do is we do a couple different things. We look at 5 years out, and it's tough because once you get past about year 2 and 3, you're basically competing against yourself because you don't know what's going to come. You don't know what inflation is. You don't know what the interest rates are going to be. But one of the things that we like to do is anytime we have a project that's going to go to a large scale, and I look at that anywhere from $1 million to $2 million plus, we look at doing some sort of planning grant through the state. It's a 50-50 matching. So what we do is we apply for the planning grants. And just for example, so we're doing the water main assessment study, which is already going through a planning grant. And then we have the water tower, which is going through a planning grant. And then we also have the canal crossing, which is also going through a planning grant. The purpose of them is for the subsidy of 50%, which ultimately would lead into a finance project to the state. So for example, water tower, you're talking between 4 and 6 million, but depending on what size you go with. So just kind of going through the list from the water side, some of the big ticket items is we're talking about the canal crossing. So we have 3 crossings currently. One of the crossings is about 1950, 1960, and we've had some issues with it. So that one is currently down. And then we have 2 separate crossings. One is up at CH Mason's Way. Another one is down kind of about 10 or 15 feet away from the existing one. So we're looking at actually putting a larger, we're looking at a couple different options, but one is a larger main that would suffice both of the 2 smaller ones that exist today. We're talking about a water tower that is for fire flow, anywhere from 750 to $1 million. We're still working through the hydraulics, but obviously we procured the Jones farm for a location of the water tower, but we're also looking at a couple different areas just so that we can see hydraulically what makes the most sense. We are talking about the coordination with DelDOT on the Kings Highway project. So obviously DelDOT doing the 5 roundabouts, there's a maintenance issue that comes into play with our utilities. We obviously don't want to have to go into the center of a roundabout to tear it up. So that's another piece that we're looking at, just kind of trying to predict and coordinate with DelDOT so that it makes sense to take care of utilities at the same time. Those hit the majority of the top items within the water side and the water production side, and then you move down into sewer, and I lump sewer and wastewater into the same thing, or the wastewater treatment plant. We moved forward with the headworks financing earlier this year. So that would take care of a lot of the issues with the screenings and the compactor at the headworks. That was 1.75 million. We're moving forward with that. We're hopefully going to go out to bid in the next month or two. We also went ahead and did the replacement of the PLCs at the headworks. Again, trying to coordinate with the Kings Highway sewer lining. That's trying to coordinate with DelDOT to make sure that if any utilities are going to be an issue based off location with the 5 roundabouts, that they're addressed before the project happens. Lift station upgrades. We're putting a lot of money into lift stations. So we put a very large amount for the next 3 years, and then it kind of reduces down from there. A lot of that has to do with upgrading electronics, backup generation, bypass pumping. We're looking at doing a lot of adding bypass valving in the pump stations, which allows us to utilize a bypass pump. It helps with redundancy in case of failure at any of the pump stations. We also have the EQ tank, which is at the wastewater treatment plant currently. Probably still have about 5 years left on that until replacement, but it's something that we wanted to be ahead of. And then moving towards stormwater, MS4 is kind of the piece, the creme de la creme that's out there that we're still waiting on designation. There's a possibility that it could be designated through the city. There's a possibility it could be designated through the BPW because we both technically handle stormwater, just in different aspects. And that's going to be a pretty high ticket item. And they usually say that you don't really get into expenses until about year 3 or 4 because you have a planning stage, which is the first couple of years, and then you have to start investing a lot of money when it comes to treatment, depending on the areas that have a higher maybe nitrate level, dog parks, etc. Down into electric, one of the things that we did when Bob retired is I sat down with Red. We talked about investing a decent amount into the electric. You can see a couple of undergrounding projects. We're also doing our bucket trucks and our derrick diggers. We started procuring those. You're talking about 24 months plus for lead time. So we're putting POs in now. For in theory, one of our linemen are going to be retired by the time that truck comes in. So even though we have it budgeted for 24, 25 and beyond, we have to put the PO in now to get the allocation for 2 years from now. And we're doing a couple undergrounding projects. We're also doing Pollocktown Road. We're replacing all the transformers with stainless steel for a redundancy issue because the salt air rusts out the transformers and all the conductors. So we're moving forward with that. One of the things is transformers are very expensive, so procuring those has been a challenge, but we actually did that last year. So some of them came in recently. So we're ahead of the game there. And then we're also just keeping an eye out on the big transformers down at Schley. We get testing done every 2 to 3 years from Potomac. And those are our big transformers that hold the load for the entire town. So you got 2 of them down there. One holds circuit 1 and 2. The other one does 2 or 3 and 4. So we're just mindful of those just because of lead time again. And then as you move down to support, we just keep an eye on all of our electronics, our phones, our computers, and any building improvements that we have. So all that being said, one of the things that we look at and we take advantage of is low interest loans through DENREC or DHSS, which comes to the state revolving fund. Usually, historically, they have been between 2 and 2.5%, and we've done them for 20 and 30 years accordingly. Highland Acres, I believe, was a 30-year loan. Savannah Place was a 20-year loan. I think the Headworks is a 20-year loan. So whenever we can, we take advantage of it. That all goes through the WEAC Council, which is the Water Infrastructure Advisory Council. On the electric side, we have the ability to tap into DMEC, who's our joint action agency. On the power side, that's where we buy our power from. They have the ability to finance AMI. We've talked about doing a lot of larger scale projects like the transformers on Schley that would kind of fall into that. So it allows us to really gain traction with being 8 municipalities that are a part of DMEC. It gives us the ability to be flexible, and it's helped out other communities that have done large scale tie-ins with Delmarva, things that are $10-15 million. DMEC kind of fronts that cost and then finance it out for all of us. And then just holistically talking about ARPA funds, one of the things we did is we approached the city. We asked for some ARPA funds to take care of some of the issues that we have on the wastewater side, the water side. And so that was approved. So we have that kind of out there looming, and we have to decide how we're going to utilize that as well.
That's all?
Yeah. That was a synopsis in 5 minutes.
It still all comes up to almost $42 million.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
Do you ever have to switch priorities because of changes in state or Sussex County projects?
Every day. I mean, one of the things we did is we went forward with the new well allocation permit, which we received, and one of the portions of the well allocation permit is we have to actually do a monitoring plan for saltwater intrusion and for PFAS and PFOAs. We continually do the PFAS and PFOAs testing. We've recently had it done in September. Everything seems good. That well site is the most ideal you can get in the state. I mean, we've looked at other areas for wells, and where the 5 wells are currently, it is like the Mecca. I mean, whoever picked that should be standing next to Bill Gates. But one of the things that we're dealing with is we had well 3 go down, and that was the possibility of some intrusion of sand. So we're looking at that, and that, starts to take priority over other projects. The other thing that we're starting to look at is, what makes sense to do now versus prolong, just because of the cost of everything, the cost of labor, the cost of material, the lead time on material. So it's really every day changes, and we just try and be as flexible as possible. Plus, and we're going to get into it as part of the cash reserve policy, as we dipped a little bit lower, there's some thresholds that we have to do, or some things that the board has to do. One of them is raise rates, one of them is seek funding, and one of them is starting to look at these projects and do you start prolonging, do you put a priority to some of them? So Kim and I work almost every day and talk through the projects to see what makes sense to do now, how much of a priority is it, do we shift some things around, do we push projects out, do we push projects forward? So
one of the things that I remember earlier this year, that you switch projects or accelerated a project for putting in water lines or along the Kings Highway or Savannah, because DelDOT was going to repave, and if you did the project now, you could save a lot of money by doing it now, switching from a different time frame.
yeah, so we were talking about doing sewer and water to the folks. The Savannah 16 is what we deem them, but it's basically from our 69 kV tie-in point down to North Atlantic Drive. One of the things is DelDOT was putting in a sidewalk, and as they were doing it, they were reconstructing the road. So we actually took and teamed up with DelDOT in that aspect, and we had a J account, and the J account allows us to essentially have work be done by their contractor, and then they bill us for whatever the cost it is.
Are those 16 homes you mean?
Yeah. So the bids came back very favorably in the time that we're in. And then we also put the sewer in the backyard where their septics were. So we put the water in the front where all their wells are, and the sewer in the back where their septics are. So it kind of correlated with where they're, and it tries to, help save money in that aspect, because on the front side, that there is a lot in the road. There's a duct bank right there. The sewer line and the water line, the water line exists right next to the duct bank, and then the sewer line, there's nothing out the front. So we would have had to develop a system that went all the way down, gravity, and it was a very tough area for elevations.
Had you done this if they hadn't been working with it? Quite expensive.
It would have been expensive, and that's what we take into account, because for the folks there, you obviously, when you come back and say water and sewer is going to cost you $50,000, there's an unrealistic approach there that people, it doesn't become viable. But with that, interesting thing came up yesterday is at the city council meeting, DelDOT talked about the water line, or talked about the bridge work that they're going to be doing past the Lewis Dairy, working its way across the bridge over towards the Coast Guard in Denrac. One of the things is we would definitely take advantage of that, because that would be the last piece of the pie for the water line from all the way from Savannah, the whole way out to the very end. And so they're going forward with this project.
That is huge.
I had raised my hand, because if they're going to be tearing the road up, it makes no sense for us to wait, another 10 years and then tear the exact road up.
That's
So-
a perfect example of switching. the
Yep.
timeframe, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, same thing with Kings Highway project. We have been discussing it, but when DelDOT came through and said we're gonna put the 5 roundabouts in, not only are we gonna take advantage of it, but then there's also a maintenance issue that comes into play, in which DelDOT also takes some responsibility for that work, for relocating those assets.
Hey, Austin,
Yeah,
mind if I jump in just for a question? One of the things you said early on was that it was difficult to project cash flow needs out after 1 or 2 years. And I'm trying to, is that because each one of these projects that you've determined you want to do, it's really hard to project its particular cost? Or is it because the priorities every year keep changing and they're a little bit out of your control?
it's a mixture between the two, because DelDOT's doing a lot of work, and one of the hardest things that we deal with is that when you're in the state right of way, not only does the cost go up because you're dealing with a state right of way, but you also start getting into the time frame constraints. In a normal circumstance, they do not want you to work during the summer. We've ran into issues where they've allowed it in the past to finish a project. Like we had one that was going on for 2 years. We wanted to finish up before we worked into year 3, but they really tried, because of the traffic and the resort nature of the area. But the other factor into it is that in this circumstance, if you go back 2 years and you look at what a project cost 2 years ago versus what that same project costs today, it's uncomparable. I mean, you're talking a 25% increase, not only in your material costs, but then you go to labor. So it's a very tough market. And then you start dabbling into another issue, which we've actually became aware of through contractors, but at the legislative level within the state, there was discussions about changing some legislation up when it comes to federally funded projects or state funded projects, in which you get involved in mandating union participation in those projects. So essentially they would deem a percentage of the workers that are involved in the project have to be union based. And there's actually the local contractors.
Many of those things would be known ahead of time, though. Things like union needs or not able to work in the summer. I was kind of referring more to, you said that it's hard to kind of project the cash flows out a couple of years. So that's going to have to be the unknown, the random components of your life. We have a big storm that comes in that might force you to have to deal with something you didn't originally intend to deal with, as an example. In the financial field that I come out of, a lot of it is around risk management or understanding uncertainties and trying to price uncertainty. And so when you start talking about the future and the uncertainty around that future, I kind of perk up a little bit. And I'm trying to sort of get my wheels turning here a little to see if there's anything, from the world I came from that might be able to lend a little bit of help. But anyway, I don't want to derail it. I wanted to kind of try to understand the nature of whether it's that your projects keep changing or that the price of a project changes over time, because you might deal with those in a different way in an uncertain, when you're dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mike. Any other questions at the moment on that? We just want to try to go through these documents and have a little more disclosure, if you will, so that it makes a little more sense and people can understand. So let's go to the next one, to the current fiscal year operating and maintenance budget. Jim, could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Historically, for the O&M budget, we look at 3 to 5 years of information, and based off of that, we do a prediction of what the budget will be for the following year. However, we're in a little bit of a different time with COVID, so we thought it would be more beneficial to look predominantly at last year, which is when people started coming out of the house, but there's still people that are still staying here full time, like they weren't before. So we looked predominantly at those numbers, and we included our revenue rate adjustments for residential through Board of Public Works on the top section. And we also try to look at the projects with, that we're doing with GMB that we're billing out to developers, which is increasing with all of our projects. So there are a little bit more unknowns this year, I think, compared to previously. But so far, we are pretty much right on for our bottom line. We're like 1% off. So
Yes. Good.
for our operating expenses, we definitely raised those compared to last year. Just yesterday, me and Austin were on the phone looking at the prices of chemicals, and the prices per pound are up, 3 cents, but when you're ordering thousands of pounds at a time, it's
Like
a
what
big
kind of
impact.
percentage are we talking about?
I wanna say,
Just round figures.
I would say like 7%.
So,
7%.
so everything's
from
going
just-
up, in other words.
From just July of last year
Yes, yeah.
to June
Mhm.
of this year.
And then you throw fuel surcharges. in
And
there
then
too,
they're
because-
doing fuel surcharges of 7%
Yeah,
as well for Clean Delaware. For our non-operating revenues, this is our interest income coming from our investments and our interest expense for our loan obligations. Our impact fees for when people hook up. This year it is high for Tower Hill, Lewis Waterfront Preserve, and the lodge at Historic Lewis is expected to come on by the end of the fiscal year. Our grant revenue, I actually just updated this to include some Headworks grant money. But this actually should be going up, especially getting ARPA funds. That'll be lumped in the grant line. And change in market value, you can't really predict it, but it is not good.
No, not at all.
Okay, any questions or further comments?
Oh, and for monthly, I do look at a historic percentage of a full budget and what was actually used that month. And I'll do the budget times that percentage for that month. So it's not the same number across the board for each month.
Yeah.
Not too true.
Yeah.
And so each month you are looking at what was budgeted and what is it running this month,
Mhm.
and looking to see if there's any other trending
Why it's
aspect.
doing that, yeah.
Okay. Good, thank
Does
you.
this work looks like it would feed in a lot to the work that Austin was just talking about as well. I mean, you have your revenue here that you need to help fund, I guess, a portion of the projects, I get outside of the grants and things like that. So this is all kind of interrelated in how sometimes in, back in the investment field for a second, sometimes in life, there's risks you can diversify away or control or get a better handle around, but sometimes there's just risks you can't get rid of.
That's
And in those for those types of risks, that uncertainty, you try to look for other ways to sort of manage that. Most of us have insurance for those risks in life we can't control. But again, as you guys are talking about this uncertainty in the future and these cash flows and the cash flow needs and things, some of it is there ways maybe we can project the future in ways will be a little bit more helpful, and there may not be. The other thought I have is there ways to try to get our head around the risk that we just have to accept, and then try to figure out what's the best way to kind of prepare for those, whether it be, reserving funds or different types of insurance or lines of credit or, or other things that might be available. But I'll stop there. You guys are probably going through all this. I'm trying to understand your world a little bit.
No, that's one of the
Perfect.
things.
That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah, because
perfect.
That's what you gotta do.
we push forward because knowing that risk and knowing, how projects change, we actually push forward and we have to a more deeper discussion, but we did reach out for a line of credit to hold as something for, risk management. Because even when you're talking our cash reserve policy, even though that there's a decent amount in that account, if you get a hurricane that hits here,
No kidding.
what you have in there will probably not even cover material.
Oh my
So
God.
it,
Okay.
it's, I mean, when you, and then you start talking about lead times, I mean, when transformers are 52 weeks. So it's, we got a quote for 20 transformers, it was $200,000.
And what would it have been 3 years ago, or a year ago even?
Not
No,
200,000.
So it's up 50% or more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because your cost of material, I mean, there, again, that's where you have the local municipalities, even co-op and DP&L are going back to the federal government to try and change the standards when it comes to the materials that are used to build the transformers, so that we can basically build them domestically instead of relying on Ukraine, Russia for the
Right.
production of the metals to come over here for us to build transformers. So there's a lot of moving parts.
And that 200,000 for those transformers, even if you have the 200,000, the transformers don't appear for how long?
The quote we had was 22 to 26 weeks with a more realistic number of 34 weeks. And that's paying extra to get them faster. And just to add clarity to it, so then you have, for us as a municipality, but one of the things we do different is we actually put the developer is responsible for procuring and installing to our standards versus the co-op and DP&L who actually build the system for the developer and then they get reimbursed by the developer. One of the most interesting things that have recently taken place is that the co-op, more specifically, has stopped all new installations, and they have been told it will be for at least a year. And that has to do with inventory. So they want to keep a minimum threshold for that event, which is the hurricane, the bad storm, the tornado. And so they've stopped, and you start getting a laundry list of developers that are like, okay, I want to get in line. So if you have a 52-week lead time for install from co-op and you're number 12 on the list, when do you think your install is? Not 52 weeks. So it's a brand new era, brand new thought process.
Yes.
So, Mike, I have a question for you. I've been wondering about trying to figure out how we can better project how much money we're going to need. And one thing you mentioned was no, the knowns. At least put those on the right or left side, whichever side you want to put them on, and then from there, then go and really try to look into what's going on. I mean, we know that all these costs are going up. You know, the supply chain question, I've read him up down before, and there's question marks about when's that going to turn around because now manufacturers going up, et cetera. So where would you suggest we start?
That's probably a bigger question than we'll have here. And I can't get my head around, you know, what's going on here. However, things like inflation, everybody, I used to be a capital markets economist, so I actually used to project those things many years ago. There's a lot of projections out now that are as good as anybody else's projections. So one of the things we could do just from an inflation perspective is to take available surveys from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve itself projects inflation. There's a whole series of investment banks that project inflation. There's implied inflation numbers that come out of the financial markets when you look at the difference between the yields on nominal bonds and inflation protected bonds and things of that sort. So we can talk about that. That gets you at least a feeling of what general inflation will be. One issue that some specific industries have found is that sometimes that general inflation doesn't always pertain. So inflation is the average rise in all prices. But at any given time, some prices are dropping, some prices are rising. Relative prices are always changing. So for example, a lot of universities have found that when they project their cash flow needs, the costs of higher education have been rising faster than the general rate of inflation. So they've created their own inflation index. So we all talk about inflation. We might talk about the consumer price index, CPI. Yale and Harvard and all them, they have their own, they actually created a higher education index. So there's that little bit of uncertainty, but as far as the general inflation numbers like CPI, we can get widely used surveys to at least get that projection. But that will come with a big uncertainty around it, and that's going to have to be in that unknown category that we'll have to think about. The more unknowns you have, the bigger pool of capital and other things you may have to do to make sure you have some buffer, sort of self-insure around those uncertainties.
I think one of the biggest things that I would love for you to take a look at with your background is actually our investment policy, because one of the things that we've been battling is that this is what I would deem as a newer age for us as far as the volatility of the market. I mean, you always had that like flat line 3% return. You went through a couple of years there where you were making, and this recent year, more specifically the last 2 quarters, have really changed for us. And I think we've kind of been toying the idea of, when is that threshold to kind of even to pull back and put it in a little to no yield account, because when you're bleeding and then a second gunshot comes in and you're bleeding even more and it continues, it's like that fighting. It's the risk management aspect. But I think between us, because we use the same with the city, we use the same investment group, which is UBS. And one of the things that we've been discussing is changing the policy, or do we start looking at splitting investments into all different types of accounts, or who holds them, because we have an institution that we use for our banking and we just got the line of credit, but then we use UBS for all of our investments. Should we diversify and split that off?
So those questions are the right questions to be asking. And again, we're not going to have enough time on this call.
Yeah,
but
no,
I give you,
and given the volatility of the market, I don't know if I would. It's my personal.
Yeah, but that's a question that really has to go
That's not in
into
this
a lot more detail. I
I'm
mean,
happy to talk to you.
delve into it at a different date, but continue looking at it.
but I'd like to give if you don't mind, just maybe a minute, kind of philosophical piece on that, because what you're talking about, everybody is sort of thinking about. I entered the business in 1987, the financial business, and there was a crisis every year. 87 stock market crash, the junk bond crash. You might forget the savings and loan debacle,
Yes.
long-term capital management collapse, the Russian ruble crisis, the aging contagion, the tech bubble crisis, and it goes on and on. Every year we had riveting events. All of them were unpredictable. And one of the things you have to understand about the financial system, and that's stocks and bonds and all of that. Everybody thinks about stocks and bonds as generating a return, and that's why you invest in those. But that return has a corollary, it's called risk. The reason that someone pays you a return is because you're willing to accept their risk.
Exactly.
If you invest in a 10-year treasury bond, you're going to get paid a very little interest rate. If you invest in a high yield corporate bond of the same maturity, you're going to get a higher interest rate, because that corporate bond has more risk than the treasury bond does. If you invest in a junk bond, that has a lot of risk, and you're going to pay a lot. You're going to get paid a lot more interest to take that on.
It's called risk.
What's that?
I said it is called risk.
It's called risk. So when you invest in the markets, you're taking on risk. If you happen to believe that risk can be largely unpredictable, then the question you have to deal with, just like we're talking about here with your operating systems, is how do you deal with that uncertainty? And there's 2 major ways to do that. One of them is to calibrate the risk that you think you can take on as an organization and only expose yourself to that risk, that level of risk. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to target, for example, your equity allocation versus your bond allocation versus your money market allocation. That's called an asset allocation decision. Another version and variation that people try to take on is they decided they can figure out the risk before it happens. And so they do something called tactical market timing. I don't think the record of that historically is very good. I think people tend to lose a lot more money trying to do that than they gain. And oftentimes a lot of people that gain are doing it because they're lucky, not because they have some great future insight. So my, what you're potentially offering, Austin, which was, now that the market's feels more volatile, maybe to pull back. If you really look at it historically, when you expose yourself to a process like that, you end up buying high and selling low. Because what happens is after the market's going up for a couple of years, everybody gets real comfortable with it and everybody wants to pile in. So that's kind of the buy high. And then you get an unpredictable event and the market takes a big drop like it has since November, and everybody panics and wants to get out, but it's usually after you've really, been hit hard. And that's the normal human way to handle this risk. I don't think it's the right way to handle that risk. I think there's better and more thoughtful ways to handle it, but that's a longer discussion, and I'm happy to be involved in that. I have a lot of background in that area.
Perfect.
Thank
The
you,
other
Brian.
consideration we have to be concerned about, of course, is that we're a municipality. And it's public money, so as opposed to a corporation or an individual or whatever, so. Yeah, okay, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. I mean, to get you involved, in other words.
You got that right.
Can we move to the next document?
Minimum
5C?
cash reserve.
This is a spreadsheet that Kim made up, and between her and myself, I added some notes to help me understand what's going on. In summary, I think this could be used as a short-term shortfall. The number of the 3.8 minimum cash reserve policy for the 22-23 fiscal year is 10.4 million, 10.5 million round numbers. And the UBS cash reserves at 5/31 was almost the same, giving a net shortfall of $500,000. And in my understanding, this is kind of the normal operation shortfall for this current fiscal year. And if we're going to go to 5D and compare it for longer, for larger projects. But Kim, can you
Sure.
maybe clarify it better than I did?
So the minimum cash reserve was created using our, is it UFS?
Yeah.
Yeah, in conjunction with UFS, who is our rate projector company that we use. Line one is our working capital lag. It's 25% of our operating expenses from the fiscal year budget. The line two is historic cost of assets. It's 2%. The line three is current year from our capital plan, and we reduce out our proposed borrowing. And line five is our full 5 years, so we're doubling up on the first year, making that 30% that we're counting, less proposed borrowing. Line seven is our customer deposits that we have to keep to refund our customers at any time. And self-insured, we have 2 million in self-insured and then 30,000 of deductibles. And we have to keep 100% of that, obviously. And when you come over to the right side, it'll give you the number of the percentages we have to keep is the almost 10.5, like Richard said. And compared to what we actually have, we're short about $500,000.
This is the first one I'm bringing up, the double dipping, or do you want to wait on that?
what I would say is that this is another one of those that we'd like to, as a committee, take a look at. Because we've discussed, is 5 years realistic? If you really don't know, and this goes back to your risk management in year 3, 4, and 5. Strategically, do you reduce down your percentage of that year because you have the unknowns? You know, if you go back 5 years previously, can you predict what this year would have been? We've also talked, you know, you do a higher percentage or 15% of your current year, and then you do the same thing the following year, so you're double dipping. So do you just look at 3 years with a higher percentage, or 5 years with a higher percentage in the first year because of your certainty? And then as the uncertainty becomes more prevalent, you kind of reduce out. We've also talked about, instead of self-insurance, do we get an insurance policy for pollution and for flood and hold those and have a deductible? Or do we remain with the opinion that we should self-insure ourselves for pollution and flood? So those are just a couple different ideas that we've discussed that I think would be beneficial as a committee to discuss and see if it makes sense.
Right, well, this ties into item
Yep.
7, which is a review of the 3.8
Yep.
cash reserves, which is, I think, 3 pages
Yep.
of what details. And that issue of 5 years versus 3 years, and the double dipping, so to speak, the way it's set up, they kind of tie together.
Richard, can I ask a question on the?
Yes.
This minimum cash reserve sheet. Where is that 10 million effectively invested right now, your cash reserve portfolio?
It's invested with UBS.
So it could be in equities, bonds, all that kind of.
Breakdown.
Well, that there's actually if you, it's,
Is it 80-20? Is it what?
well, there's parameters that has there's parameters in the investment policy that show what you would have in equities, what you would have, and that's another topic we wanted to discuss because the parameters are so I don't know if the word is volatile, but their range is so high so that you would have like a range from 20 to 80%. And so do we start to narrow those down? I don't know what it is as of current. I haven't,
In our UBS account,
how it's broken down,
like what we have in bonds, and bonds are about 80%.
80%.
Yeah, normally those types of managers like a UBS would give you a range. They would say, we'll keep your equity allocation between 50 and 80 or some. They give you a wide range.
Yes.
The problem is in an investment portfolio of the type you guys are investing in, equities are the primary driver, the risk of that, the uncertainty around the ultimate outcome of that portfolio. And they give you such a wide range, it's almost impossible to actually figure out what the risk profile of your portfolio is really going to be. But on a more slightly technical note, one way to look at this minimum cash reserve, the way that you guys have put it together, which I think is really interesting. For those of you that have, know what a balance sheet is, you can almost look at this as the right-hand side of the balance sheet. They're your liabilities that you need to fund with an asset. The asset is your UBS pool. If you're not careful in the way you design that pool, that asset pool, you can get what's called an asset liability mismatch. In other words, the assets don't move the same way as the liabilities, and that alone could become a risk. So a lot of banks years ago used to get into that problem. They would have 30-year mortgages on their asset side of their balance sheet, and they would have daily liquidity deposits on the right side. So anybody could come in and pull their money out of the bank like a bank run, but all their loans, all their assets were very illiquid long-term mortgages, so they couldn't sell them. And that was that's in the industry, it's called an asset liability mismatch. Your assets don't move like your liabilities. Pension plans are another big problem with that. A lot of pension plans have obligations, liabilities to their pension holders, but they have assets that are they don't move the same way, and it causes just the financial design causes a risk in the system that doesn't necessarily need to be here. I don't know whether any of these concepts would necessarily fully pertain to this, but you have to be a little bit careful when your asset pool moves very differently than your liabilities.
Thank you for your continued input, Mike.
Oh, you're welcome, but you can tell me to knock it off too.
No.
Keep it up.
Okay, let's go to the 5D. This was intended to have a picture without using numbers per se, showing the operation expenses, which are historically stable and estimatable, plus the capital projects, which are historically variable and subject to needed modification, equaling the required payments from reserves and cash reserves to pay 100% as they are due. However, there is a shortfall often due to a lag in funding reimbursement of 15 to 30% because of reduced reimbursements.
You got it.
Okay, thank you. And the reason for that is, as an example, developer fees are usually due when certain phases of the project are done. BPW, in providing infrastructure, has to pay for 100% of those infrastructure installations as they are due, but the developer extends the payments that would be 100% because their obligation is linked to occupancy rates after the project becomes available for the beginning of occupancy and other such examples. Ultimately, the amount of the developer's fee gets put in, but it's that lag that causes the shortfall. The last column is just trying to list the sources of cash and other issues impacting the cash sources. In the middle, UFS, who every 3 years does a rate study for the BPW of whether rate increase, decrease, and so on. The 3 guidelines are, especially for increasing cash needs, 1, raising utility rates, which we've already done, cutting and reducing expense spending, which somewhat is imposed by default with current market conditions. And 3 is increase the funding resources. And for long-term capital projects requiring large funding, this bottom section shows the proposed borrowing for the 5-year program that was listed in 5C. The cash reserve policy for 5 years was 31 million. And with the cash reserve balance of 10 million, that means we are short quite a bit for long-term financing of some form or another from the various sources that are required. And knowing what that the value, the true value of that long-term large project financing is a function of, well, what's that 5-year project schedule really about? What's realistic? So this schedule was meant to try to conceptualize why the $500,000 shortfall in the cash flow schedule is only a small portion of the exposure that needs to be
Call
covered.
from 606 involved.
But if that-
Just check.
Yes, okay.
Call
This is
right.
fine.
You gotta pay up more.
So, any comments on this? It ties in, I think, with what Mike is saying, that, you know, that there's a lot of moving parts in the financing and the risk management decisions.
I have a question about this whole developer timeframe situation. I don't know when it all got started or how it got started, and maybe industry-wide, that's general. But I have a question as to why it is that we're doing it this way, as opposed to making the developer pay like more upfront, like we are paying more upfront. I don't know what industry-wide, what the criteria are industry-wide or what it is.
So for some developers, we do have escrow accounts that they post before work
Mhm.
gets started. And then there are other developers that we don't have that required, that will pay as we get the expenses. So we'll get the expenses and then we will bill them. So it's another 30-day lapse from there that the money's due.
Why would we have it different?
Yeah, you would just, I'll provide an example. So you're doing the Pilot Town road work. This goes back to the same job or the same thing we try and, forecast out for what Del Dot's gonna do, and then we coordinate our capital project. So here you have 2 developments that are along Pilot Town Road, future developments. That will obviously need to tap into Pilot Town Road, right?
Mhm.
They don't have a developer agreement in place, but they want you to do the work,
Right.
which we've done twice, and they pay. So essentially, and at that point, we didn't even outlay monies for it before we got reimbursed. So we did a stub for sewer, stub for water. We got reimbursed before the billing hit our table. In other instances, we'll get a bill, we'll pay it, and then the same thing happens.
But don't we have some developers where, let's just take, I don't know, one off of New Road or whatever.
Tower Hill.
Where they're billing, they're paying us when their homes sign up.
Oh, yeah, that's impact fees.
Yes.
Yeah,
So-
that's impact fee.
Yeah.
So, but this, is this time lag big or is it a problem?
I don't see it as being a problem. It's really, what it comes down to is that it's the same thing. We could pave Pilot Town Road, and when the development gets approved, development's gonna come back and they're gonna cut open that road that we just did. And then it makes no sense to do it. So there, we're doing the job and they say, hey, can you give me a water stub and a sewer stub? We put the stub in, they cut us a check. In that case, it was $70,000 and was at our doorstep in 5
Okay.
days.
Cost
Well,
of doing
yeah.
business.
That was
Yeah.
a good case.
All I'm saying is that anytime we have any kind of lag, we should be looking to not have one.
I agree.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think we are looking to have escrow accounts to be in every agreement.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Now that would
That
make
has
a
been
difference. Yeah,
inconsistent.
that's good.
And
Okay.
each developer's agreement is set up differently. For
Mhm.
example, the one that we did yesterday, or the one that we did most recently, one of the things that the developer wanted to do, which was the developer at White's Pond,
Mhm.
they wanted to post a good faith escrow. And so there you have it where they posted a good faith
Mhm.
escrow
Mhm.
prior to the development moving forward with the DA. And you guys approved the DA, waiting for the city's input on the other side, because that's a dual DA at that point, because it's a city
Mhm.
development. But just providing examples of
Good.
how.
Yeah, I mean, getting paid as we put things in. Of course, one of the problems is if you got wait for a transformer, let's say. What is it, 24 weeks or whatever?
At least.
You have to pay for the transformer when?
No, if you're a developer's doing it, developers, they're building that infrastructure. Developers.
Okay, so we're not doing that one.
No.
Okay, I'm just trying to think of
Mhm.
examples where we're putting up money up front for materials, et cetera, that we're not getting paid for by 6 months.
No, what we do
I think
is,
Tom's making a really good point, though. In a sense, you're extending an interest-free loan to the developers by carrying that for 6 months. And you're also taking on a risk that the developer goes under or something happens
Yeah.
between. So by trying to minimize that, effectively, it's almost like taking away that interest-free loan and reducing the risk that, you know.
We may have had any problems with it before, but given,
yeah.
We're changing that, is that what you're saying, Austin?
No, what we have saying is that, for example, in this circumstance, I'm using the one on Politown Road. There was a change order that was given, and they actually, the one posted the money before the work was even done. The second one posted the money before the work was even done. So both of them paid before the work was ever done.
Yeah, well,
That
that's,
was
we
only
should be
because-
doing that.
And then we have other developments that, as a bill comes in for engineering costs, it's usually the
Mhm.
biggest one. That we put that in our expenses, we pay it the next month, and then we bill that to the developer, and then they'll pay the following month. So it's about a 30-day lag.
Cost
Okay.
plus percent.
And we
Per
do have
cost.
an administrative markup.
And all but that 30 days then impacts our financial reserve policy.
Our expenses are already set up. It impacts our operating account balance.
Okay,
And then also take into consideration that when you have an in-town development, we're also doing, so we do all, we're the bank. So for city infrastructure and for the board infrastructure, all of it comes to us. So we manage it all.
well, I guess I'm not, you know instances more than I would. I'm just saying that
Not too bad. are you?
we should be
Yeah.
really tight on that issue. Any time we have to bill or pay way ahead of time, if the developer wants the work done, then he's gonna have to
And
pay up front also.
I think that is a consistency that we are working on, that
Good.
Austin and Mike are
Yeah,
working
good.
on,
Good, okay, that's good.
Mike Hoffman.
Let's keep moving here. Next one, 5E, which is in lieu of franchise. Can you just comment on that?
Based on our revenues, we pay 5% to the city. And in the policies, I believe it states 2 to 5%. And right now we have the agreed upon amount of 5%.
Okay, and that's rounds out to like 700,000 a year.
I can tell you in just a second. Yes, for this year, about 780,000.
And that's been reasonably steady.
The 5% has been steady. I can't tell you the exact date, but it has been years.
And as the income increases on which the fee is based,
The expense goes up.
the expense goes up.
And did we find it that it's in our charter?
It's in the charter.
Yeah.
Right.
I can also say, by the way, in perspective, at one of the conferences I went to, one of the issues they were talking about was the leader of that particular session said, don't pay anything. And then we went around the room and 5% was the lowest amount anybody was paying. A couple of municipalities were paying 30%.
But they weren't independent.
They weren't independent, no.
Yeah.
So I don't know what we can, we'd have to get a charter change to do it, change it,
To change to what?
the 5%.
The charter says it's 2 to 5%.
Oh,
It is
I
a
thought
range.
it was 5.
No,
Sure, okay,
It's
2 to.
It's a range from 2 to 5.
Good, okay.
Um, 5F is the summary trial balance.
And that I just printed off. I gave this to Richard just for him to start looking at the accounts to just see how they're running through their balances. Because he is our newer treasurer, and just to make him more familiar. And then he shared that with you guys, for you guys to look through as well.
So this would be what Mike was referring, this has a link to what Mike was referring to of the asset liability mismatch.
Yeah, so this is the trial balance, so it has every account, it's not just assets and liabilities.
So we pull out the assets from that in order to compare the assets with the liability.
Yeah.
Okay. And the last 5 document is the loan obligations. Up to that.
So turned off our fiscal year loan obligations. We have Highland Sewer and Water, Savannah Sewer, Jones Farm, and the wastewater treatment plant loan. And their percentages are 2% except for wastewater treatment plant, which is 2.5%. They are 20 to 30 years. And I want to say wastewater treatment plant is done in 2027. Then everything else is much longer.
And this is, well, they're all fixed rates.
Yes.
Any comments, thoughts on this? I mean, I think it's just straightforward. It's
Tell me what you know.
Oh, the one good thing to, it's always good to be a debtor when there's unexpected inflation. So I am guessing that all the interest rates are well below the inflation rate, which means the real rate on these interests is very low. It's negative. But if inflation stays at the level and is expected, you can expect to see interest rates starting to rise pretty sharply going forward.
These are all about.
Yes.
And
And the wastewater treatment plant is February 2027 is the last payment.
That's the 2.5.
Yes.
Can we refinance it and get cash?
At 10%?
Yeah, tell me where.
Okay, let's go to the equipment purchase bonding options, 6A and 6B. 6A was a proposal by Fulton Bank for an equipment line of credit separate from just a general account. And the question
This is
is,
just a discussion, correct?
yes,
It's not, okay.
right,
Right.
but we'd like to hear any comments, pros, cons, advice on the reason we do a separate equipment line of credit, Kim, as opposed to taking it out of the general account.
Just to even up the money, instead of putting out $300,000 for a truck, we'll get a loan and pay over 5 years, 7 years.
And do the rates seem reasonable
Well, are they real?
or competitive?
So they didn't put exact rates, they used what rate they use, and then
To do this.
their addition.
They just
whatever,
did
yeah.
the rate to go,
Yeah.
yes.
So for the equipment line of credit is more of a traditional loan that you have, it turns out. And they use the Bloomberg plus
Mhm.
2%.
Mhm.
And for line of credit, they're using standard overnight funding right now. Plus 2% for unsecured, and for secured is the prime minus 1.25%.
Did, you know, the big bucket truck or whatever that we're looking to buy, and the manufacturer was willing, or the
Yes.
distributor, whoever, was willing to do it in a payments?
There was a little blurb on there on the
Yeah.
quote that said that financing is available and their interest rates were very low on that quote. I can't remember the
That was
exact
my
number.
question.
but-
What is their rate compared to this?
This-
Yeah, it's lower than the,
So why not use that?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
It's just something else there for uncertainty.
I got it.
Not saying that we're going to tap into it.
No,
it's
no, no,
just
I
there.
understand.
Just
I
giving
was
you
just
the-
curious as to
Yeah.
what the difference might be. Okay,
Yeah.
good, all right, good. No, I think it's worthwhile, because we just have it in our back pocket.
So we
That's
haven't
nice.
yet bought the truck or committed to it.
We did commit to it. We made the PO and
Right.
gave it to the vendor.
And when do we have to make any kind of first payment, whether it's with Fulton or with,
Everybody else.
Call from
Right.
Shingle House, PA.
If we don't finance it, we obviously have to pay
Call
within
from
3 days of
Shingle House,
receiving
PA.
invoice. If we finance it, that is something we have to explore more. The truck is not expected for another 2 years.
Oh,
but it is, we are in line
Yes,
for the
we
2-year
are in
clock.
line.
so you have plenty
There
of
is a
time to make
sales order.
decision. It has original plan to have to make a decision.
Yes.
Okay.
But I'm wondering, could we fix the, probably not, but if we fix the
Like
financing in now?
Lock it in.
Mhm.
That's a great question.
Yeah, well,
Might
it's
be
not
worth
a
looking
mortgage,
at.
so
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be worth looking at.
Can you get that information, please?
Tom said, can we lock it in?
Mhm.
And on 6B, for discussion purposes, Fulton had said they would offer a much larger line of credit if we transferred all of the portfolio from UBS to Fulton
As collateral.
as collateral, and that Fulton would manage the retirement accounts in a fiscally similar way that UBS is, and that if we did that, there was a calculation of a $71,000 a year savings
We need to have the conversation
From-
with him on this one.
from between Fulton and UBS. If we went to Fulton, we would be saving the 71,000 a year.
Basically, management fees, is that what we're talking
Right.
about? Yeah.
And the ripple effect is, one effect is, do we want to put all our
All
eggs in one basket?
basket?
Right. Or
That's what I
whether,
was gonna say.
switching, like going back to the cash flow of taking the portfolio of UBS, that is the 9 million number, and putting it into the, what is it, 60,000 savings at UBS, which is giving us some interest, small amount, but it stops the bleeding.
Right.
And is that a good idea or not a good idea, or?
I'd like to just real quick go back to A. Are we going to recommend to council that we should get the equipment loan?
No,
I don't
We-
mean the council, I mean
Yes.
the board.
I know you mean.
no, we're going to get
You're just looking at me
information
and
from the financing of,
Oh, okay.
from the company. Because if it's a lower rate, that it's more advantageous
Mhm.
perhaps.
Well, for the
depending on-
equipment, line of credit, that can be used for anything deemed equipment. Like if we need to replace something at the wastewater treatment plant, that's a piece of equipment.
Right.
We can use that line.
But if
So
we,
it's
but if
not
we,
just
but we
for
finance
It's
the
not just for
truck,
that truck.
Yeah.
then it's just, you can only use it to pay for the truck.
Right, for
Okay.
that particular vendor.
Okay,
Oh, but that's just vendor related. But
Yeah.
You're talking specifically about the usage.
Yeah,
So
this is
just
more of a
blanket For
discussion.
any equipment.
Yeah,
that's
this
what
is more of
she's
a
saying.
discussion of, do we have this debt, potential debt sitting out there that we can use if we need it?
okay. Would there be other sources of a similar bonding amount? If you're shopping for an
Like, are you
equipment
talking
loan.
about like shopping around with other banks? And-
Yes,
Oh, we can
or other
absolutely do that,
sources
yeah.
that would give us that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mike?
Well, there's a couple things that you raised, which I thought were good ones, which is, do you want to bundle all your financial services to Fulton, which was a question. And some of them are specific about these rates and things like that. Were you asking for the former or the latter? I have opinions on both.
Well, the question I had was, should we have this kind of a loan or not? Just to start with.
Let's start with line of credit. I'm a big advocate of a line of credit. Generally, the fees on a line of credit are pretty low. You have to have it pay a fee to maintain them, and I think it's a great risk management tool. So if we're asking about the line of credit, I think that's something that we should definitely consider. The only question you really have to, if you get over that, is how large should that line of credit be? Because the larger the line of credit, the more you're going to pay for it. That's
So
different. What's
For
that?
the unsecured, we just have
Yeah.
to pay a one-time bank fee of $3,000, which was 10 basis points.
10 basis
And
points.
we don't have to pay anything on it unless we use it, and that's when we have to pay interest.
Yep.
And that's
so
the
I'm
loan
really-
that's the loan that we already took. That's already in place.
The first one at the top, the 3 million, we've
We've
already
already done that.
done that.
Right. Just to be clear.
I mean, yeah,
But
thank you.
now- yeah.
Specifically on these, the 6A, which I'm looking at here, I actually don't know what the Bloomberg is. Is that Bloomberg's treasury bill rate or prime rate? I don't know what Bloomberg is. Bloomberg's just a data provider. It's not, there is no bond called the Bloomberg bond. Or the Bloomberg rate that I'm aware of. So it could be that I just haven't heard about it, but I'd be interested to know if there's a little more detail on what Bloomberg means. My guess is it's probably like the Wall Street Journal, for example, will poll a bunch of firms and get their prime rate, and then you'll kind of get an average prime rate. My sense is it's probably that. But there should be more description than just Bloomberg. I would, with all these banking things, banks are looking for good opportunities. I would, I think you guys mentioned this. I would definitely try a couple of banks, just to see what else might be available. As far as actually bundling all the things together, like for example, the cash reserves and pension and all that stuff, I'd be very apprehensive about doing something like that. Every one of them is a different set of skills. The ability to run a retirement account, retirement plan effectively for the retirees is a different skill set than making a truck loan. And when you bundle all that together to try to lower some overall cost, I just worry that you might be giving up a lot more than you're really getting by doing that.
And that's,
I'm not in favor of 6B at all.
thank you.
So
But 6A, I think we should look at.
Fawn Bank does have different branches, obviously, of their
Well, the
management, the asset management, they have the retirement management.
There's when you get into retirement management, again, this is all we could go on for hours on this, and I won't. But There's very different approaches to how to do that. For example, you can go to Vanguard and you can take an index approach and you can get extremely low fees. They won't try to market time, tactical time risk and all that, so that's a very cheap way to do it. The Children's Beach House, which I'm on their finance committee, we actually did move to using Vanguard, and we decided to manage our risk and manage our portfolio in that perspective. There's more actively oriented managers. They like to buy individual stocks and bonds, and they like to, move in and out of the market. Historically, UBS had a lot more of that. I'm out of date on their processes. They may have evolved since then, and I know nothing about Fulton. It very well may be that Fulton actually outsources some of that activity to somebody else underlying.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah, so there's that's a question that that's an onion that you need to kind of peel for a little while before you know what you're doing there.
Right, I agree.
Agree with that one.
The question then, should we recommend, because this is what we're charged with, and to some degree, is to recommend to our board what, something, anything, whatever we decide to recommend.
Well, what to do with the change in market value of the UBS portfolio?
Okay.
Ride it out, switch it to something else, put it into the savings account, or?
Yeah, so just to be very clear, I fall into the camp that you can't predict the future, risk. So I want to couch that my comments are coming from that particular view. If you find yourself in a position, if you take that view and you find yourself in a position that when the market drops 20% over a 6 or 8 month period like it has, that you now have to pull money out of the market and reallocate, I would say you made a mistake. You were probably over-allocated to risk to start with, because now it has pushed you into reacting to that risk. And so I think so one of the things I would strongly encourage would be to really think about the appropriate risk profile of this organization. So that's number one. Number two, I have no view and no knowledge about how the market might evolve over the next 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. What I will say is I do think over time, the market tends to reward for taking on risk, but sometimes you have to face the downside of that, which we are now. If in the long run, let's say 3, 5, 10 years, you need to generate a real rate of return, a return above inflation, equities are going to give you your best possible avenue to do that. But bearing in mind that there's going to be periods of time where you're going to have to bear the downside of that risk. So calibrating how much equity you have in that portfolio is a very important decision. Now, I'm giving you these big generalities. You can't give an easy answer to this, because this gets back to that asset liability mismatch we talked about, how risky these portfolios really should be, and getting that decision right is paramount. Once you had that decision, then you got to kind of live with what comes down the road.
And also, several years ago, this all came up, and we changed the allocation. In other words, UBS's allocations are to a large degree what we've told them they have to be.
Yeah.
In terms of percentages.
It's conservative.
And we really, I'm going back maybe 3 years, we changed it from what was a little more aggressive to, well, in
More
my,
conservative.
to a way too conservative for me, but that's, so it's not, they don't have that much leeway as to what they can do. I mean, where they can put it maybe within those percentages, but not the percentage itself. So
well, I heard from someone on this call that those percentages are actually very wide. I think I heard 20 to 80% for equity allocation. That's enormous. Now, I don't know whether you guys are giving them more.
yes.
What is it?
No.
No, I don't think
No.
they gave an allocation. They didn't quite know.
We
what it was.
need to look that up.
Yeah, no, I don't think
Yeah.
you, yeah.
We'll have
We
to
were
pull that.
discussing that, but I don't think they actually know.
Your
We may be
advice,
talking about, not to get confused, we may be talking about different portfolios. There's the pension, there's the retirement portfolios, and then there's the cash balance or the cash reserve portfolio. I don't know what other portfolios that are being managed, or if any of those are being, which of those are being managed by UBS, but there are, they all
All of
require
those are
their own
UBS.
sort of thought.
Yeah, but that's what you need. to
Your,
find
your,
out right
your advice, your comments about risk are the right things, I believe, that we should go back and look at and be more clear in our understanding and of what actually the situation is, rather than talking in too general a term,
Yes, yeah.
too general of 20 to 80% or whatever.
Yeah, you
We
need
should
to-
be more precise in discussing what the reality is rather than what it could be.
Yeah.
But the risk aspect, I think, is a very important concept to keep in mind.
If you don't have those conversations up front and get your head, around that, what actually happens is you end up reacting to risk after the fact. And that's where I said before, many investors tend to buy high and sell low, which is not the right
And
way.
it's also why things seem to be so much more appealing as Fulton and the amount of money you think you're gonna save. It's
Yeah.
everything to do with risk management. It has everything to do with that.
Yeah.
And it looks tempting, but this is a volatile market.
And it's just the money number that we're looking
This is
at.
the- yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
So,
Thank you.
but it's just so till we move on,
Yes.
do we want to deal with 6A?
No, we're getting more information.
Okay, I got it. Now I'm with you.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And we're not doing 6C.
No, we're not doing
Not
6A.
at the moment. We don't have enough
I
money.
didn't really tell you when you first told me about it, but second, sure, I was coming.
Okay.
The last item is the cash review policy, number 7. And this was included as the policy. These are the actual policy
Are these rewrites?
words.
Is this a
Yes.
rewrite?
Yeah, it's an excerpt from the
Okay.
actual policy.
Okay.
And it talks about whatever the words say is what
What it is.
What it
It
is
is
right
what it
now.
is.
And we should look at it and decide, okay, it'll help us understand the percentages, why they were either arbitrary or functionally, and be able to look back at the documents and see, okay, I see that 25% or
This
whatever.
requires a little homework.
Right.
So
So
just a little homework on that.
So let's move to 8, and how should we proceed from here with reviewing policies and further discussion that has been helpful so far? I think we've all learned, or we reinforced what we thought so far. Any thought on how one of the things that we were originally thinking that we would meet quarterly. At the moment, I think we need to meet more frequently than quarterly.
That's good.
I think you need to
And-
do that based on what's happening in the market right now, and I would meet more frequently than
Yeah.
quarterly right now.
So I'm thinking that we could target meeting again before the end of August. That would be helpful. It would give us time to digest
Mhm.
what this is, including reviewing the cash reserve itself. And Sharon, could you be the recipient of trial dates and to coordinate schedules?
Yep, sure can.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments at the moment, because we are at the hour and a half time frame, so late.
Richard, just a quick,
Yes.
if you don't mind, we covered, this was a very helpful meeting for me. I don't know anything about the the utility industry. So I enjoyed actually listening to a lot of this conversation. It was very open, very eye-opening. We've actually covered quite a bit of ground, a wide range of ground. Are you envisioning that there would be work done before the next meeting by a subgroup that would come with some proposals, or are you envisioning that this group would actually work through the details?
Yes.
I'm in favor of homework being done.
I'm
before.
hesitant to give a firm answer because of FOIA. I'm not sure how that applies to committees that may be different from board membership, or I don't know, the higher level gatherings. I believe that we can accomplish some exchange of information between now and, let's say, the third week in August, fourth week in August. And, you know, it's summertime and it's maybe tricky time getting people's schedule coordinated. But maybe what I've seen is correspondence to Austin, who's not a board member, and then he distributes it with a do not reply all to everybody. So everybody gets the same information, but that seems to accomplish a communication function that FOIA tolerates, if you will, if that makes sense.
So I have a question, Mike. You mentioned a couple of things that from the financial standpoint. Would you be willing to meet in a subgroup, like you know, and pick one or two of the critical financial issues and yes, review with somebody from the committee here?
I absolutely
would be a
would.
problem there.
Yeah, I absolutely would.
No, 'cause
Good. Well, then maybe we could come up with some kind of a, yeah, we'll get back to you on when you're available and so forth and so on, and go from there.
yeah, so when you come back to
We,
this meeting.
FOIA only prevents 3 board members from being together at the same time.
Okay, and since I'm not a board member, so that probably gives me some flexibility to have a conversation.
Yes,
Sure.
you wouldn't be
Right.
part of FOIA.
Yeah, I mean, you are a, I don't know, an out of town expert with a briefcase
Yeah.
who can be a resource of information, not trying to convince the individual members of
Right.
one idea or
No
another.
interest.
Well, good, thank you, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. So I'll wait to hear back from you on what you feel is a
Yes.
pressing
Okay.
first discussion.
Yes. Any other comments?
Okay.
Okay. So I would like to any move to adjourn?
I'm good with that. I have 5 phone calls.
Okay.
Okay. Then,
Make the motion.
so do we need to make a
I
motion?
don't think we
I
do.
don't think so, I'm so
I think
used
you
to
can
it.
call.
Do we have a consensus?
I don't know how to not make it.
Okay, there's a consensus, we can
Yeah.
close the meeting. Thank you
Okay,
all.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much,
Bye,
Mike.
everybody.
Thank you, Jack.
Jack, are you
Thank
still up?
Oh, yeah, I've got lots on
Okay,
there.
good, good.
Thank you very much.
Okay.